Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday? Wednesday. Keep in mind a couple things. Good morning. Keep in mind a couple things. Number one is that there's no school on Friday. It's Good Friday. For those of you who are Christian or Catholic, probably know what that means. If you don't, do you know what Good Friday is? Everybody knows what Good Friday is, yeah. So there'll be no school on Fridays, so you get to sleep in and do whatever you like. Don't forget also that there's a quiz tomorrow, and so it'll be, I forget the classes that I marked out, 33 to 42. Classes 33 to 42, that's in Microsoft Teams. And again, we'll do it same way we always do it. I'll do the online people first through Microsoft Teams, and then the in-class people will come in and write after that. So of course, if you're in class, you get to sleep in an extra hour tomorrow, or you get an extra hour to study, whatever you prefer. Last one. Last one. Last one. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about very quickly is that as you obviously know, I'm a little bit slow marking the papers. And so the explanation for this is that there's a couple things that I'm dealing with in my regular life that are taking a lot of time, and I'm not getting enough time to mark. That's not your fault, and that's not an excuse, and that's not your problem. But of course it is keeping me from finishing. And so my question to you is, would it help you if we extended the paper deadline a little bit to compensate? That would. Okay. How much should we extend it?
Exam week.
Huh?
Exam week.
Like after exam week?
No. Maybe during or second half of the exam week or something.
Okay, let me look at my calendar here. So, I believe we had it due on April 11th. That's correct, right? At midnight. And so that's the night before exam week. When would you like to move this due date to?
The next Friday.
Like the Friday after that? Let's see. That's possible. It's a bit of a squeeze for me because I have to have grades in basically at 8 o'clock Monday morning on the 19th. So I absolutely positively have to have the grades in. If not, I'm in deep trouble with Sarah and Brenda and Robin and all the people here. So I've got to have those grades in by Monday morning.
Wednesday? Will I get extra time to mark?
If we make it, okay. How about we say this? If you hand it in by the 11th, I will still give you audio comments like I've been doing, okay? If I move the due date to the Thursday, which is the 15th at midnight, you can submit at any time, but if you submit at the 15th at midnight and the 15th is the Thursday. If you submit it after that, that's fine, but I just won't give you any comments. I'll just mark it and submit your mark, okay? So if you want comments, then submit it earlier, and then I'll have enough time to actually do those. If you submit it after that point, no problem. Or if you submit it up to the 15th, fine, but I just won't have time to do the comments for you.
After April 11th.
What's that?
After
April.
April 11th.
After the 11th, I'll tell you what, I'll do my best, okay? So anytime between the 11th and the 15th, I will do my best to provide you with comments. After the 15th, I don't think I'll have enough time to do them all, but I will mark it. So, good morning. Sorry, Mulder, you're a little late to our conversation. I'll catch you up here. I've got a lot of stuff going on in my regular life that is taking up a huge amount of time. It's putting me behind on my marking. And so we're talking about extending the paper due date, okay? And so currently it's due on the 11th, which is the Sunday before exam week. We are talking about moving the due date to the 15th, which is the Thursday. But after if you submit it like on the Thursday, I'll have it at midnight like I usually do. If you submit it on the Thursday, I probably won't be able to give you the audio comments because I just won't have enough time to mark everything and get everyone's mark in, because I have to have them in 8 o'clock Monday morning on the 19th. Otherwise, I'm in deep trouble. So, does that sound acceptable to everyone? Okay. So, if you hand it in before the 15th, I will try to get you audio comments. If you hand it in kind of at the deadline on the 15th, then I'll change it in Microsoft Teams. If you hand it in on the deadline of the 15th, then I just probably won't have enough time. And if I do, I mean, if people kind of hand it in, staggered throughout the week, it's possible that I may have enough time. If everybody hands everything in at once, I'm going to be buried and I may not be able to do it. But I'll do my best one way or the other, depending on how people submit. Does that sound okay? You're okay with that? Okay. So I will change that in Microsoft Teams. Actually, online people, are you okay with that as well? Does that work for you? Yeah, I'll do my best to get you the audio comments, but after the 15th may not be possible, depending on how many people submit. But I mean, if 3 papers come in a day during that week, then I may be able to do it without too much trouble. But if everybody waits till the end, I may not have enough time. But is that okay? Is that a suitable compromise? Okay. But that said, I do apologize for the slow marking. It's been it's been a very eventful few months for me outside of the college, and so there's just a lot of stuff that's going on, and yeah, it's taking a lot of time. And again, that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. Stuff needs to be returned to you on time, and it's late. So I apologize for that. But hopefully, giving you a little more time can partially make up for that anyway. Okay, we're good? Are we good? Okay. Abby's good too. That's good to see. All right. So I will change that in Microsoft Teams so that it reflects our conversation. But in the meantime, we will. Let's say good morning. Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. Sarah is here. Good morning, Sarah. Abby is here. Good morning, Abby. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. There you are. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to where we were. So I'm just going to check one thing before we start here. Oh yeah, what's going on here. Okay. Phone is blowing up. All right. So, yesterday, what were we Yesterday we were talking about this case in France where a French school teacher had used some cartoons that France's Muslim community found deeply offensive and upsetting. He had used them in class in the context of a civics and kind of critical thinking, free speech lesson, right? And again, we haven't dug too deeply into free speech, but what we have talked about in this class is that you can hold any opinions you want and you can kind of say whatever you want, but just like we talked about earlier, your rights have limits, right? Reasonable limits. And one of those reasonable limits is that you can't actually spread hate against other groups, unless they're your opposing football or hockey team, then you can spread all the hate you want, but you cannot spread hate about other social groups, and you can't speak in a way that diminishes or infringes on the rights of others, right? Those are the limits of your rights. So again, free speech is like any other right. it is guaranteed to you, but it has some boundaries on it. You can't just say or do whatever you want. That's not what free speech is. But that said, you can still have and express views that are unpopular, right? And of course, it doesn't mean that people won't take issue with you or send you nasty social media messages, but in theory, you can express your views, right? So the teacher was giving this lesson on free speech and sort of using critical thinking, but it was some offensive material to some social groups, to Muslims in France. And so we were kind of talking about what's the issue here and how should we think about it. Did anyone kind of think about this a little bit more after class? Yeah? What was going through your mind?
The fact that he got murdered isn't just further proves his point.
Does it prove his point?
Yeah.
Maybe. What is his point, do you think?
I don't know how to say it.
What's that?
I don't know how to say it.
Is it offensive?
Perhaps.
What do you think the teacher was trying to say?
I think he's just making fun of people for being extremely religious.
Okay. Was the teacher making fun of people for being extremely religious? Well, it's hard to know. I kind of doubt it. I mean, I think if he was a good teacher doing a good job, that's not what he would be trying to do. I hope. It's hard to know unless we're actually in the room and we hear what he says, right? But that said, the cartoons themselves do kind of poke fun at the idea of religion, I suspect, right? If you've got Muhammad in there and if you've got Jesus or God or Buddha running around in your cartoons, there's a chance that you're poking a little fun at religion, right? Maybe in an offensive way, or maybe just, just a little giggle, and again, depending on your religious values, depending on the religion you belong to, depending on what is said, those things might be like, oh, ha ha, or they might be deeply offensive, right? So it's kind of thin ice, right? You've got to be careful about what you say, right? Some things are lightly humorous, and some things are not humorous at all, right? It depends on who you speak with. So Mulder, you were saying that it proves his point. So he was making fun of religion, but what was the point that you think that the murder proved?
Religious extremists. I'm not sure, but religion bad?
Yeah, maybe something to the effect of, that would be an easy conclusion to draw, I think, right? Is that, maybe the teacher was saying, we take religion too seriously, maybe we need to just, relax about it a little bit. And then, as a result of that lesson, this man is murdered, right? And so in some way, if you were to imagine that that's what he was trying to say, yeah, that would prove his point, right? Religion is ridiculous. People who are extreme are, out of their mind. And here we have someone who commits a very extreme murder on that basis. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that's tricky about this, right? Is that it can be, if you think that's the idea, it can be taken as proof, right? But this is the other tricky part, and we've said this before. I think when we were talking about racism, is that minoritized groups, when they often are seen as, people in minoritized groups are seen as like representatives of the group, right? Whereas people in the dominant group are not, right? And so, again, when someone, let's see, what's a good, well, in this example here, a Muslim man, I think, murders a French citizen. And so suddenly that guy, whoever he is, I don't know his name, whoever he is suddenly seen as representative of all Muslims, right? But 2 weeks ago, we had a man walk into a couple of massage parlors in the United States and shoot a bunch of women, right? But he's not being seen as representing all white people. Actually, he wasn't a white person. But they're actually, and in this case, I think the media is doing a reasonable job of not going down that path. But often, if it's a white person, we don't see them as representing all white people, right? And so again, the explanation will be, oh, well, maybe he's crazy, or he has a mental illness, or he was on drugs, good morning, or something, right? So we don't see the dominant groups as representatives of the entire group, but minoritized groups often are seen as representatives of the entire group. And so again, we have this person who, killed another person in a very violent fashion, but the question should be, well, maybe not the question should be, but it's much more likely that people will think of this as, oh, he murdered this man because of his religion, because he is Muslim, rather than he killed this person because this murderer is a mentally ill person, right? Would you say that you would have to be a little bit mentally ill to cut someone's head off?
That could be possible.
That could be possible.
Yes.
I would like to believe that most normal people, quote unquote, would not cut anyone's head off for any reason, right? I would like to think that. I don't know if that's true, but I would like to think that most people who are of sound mind would not do such a thing. And so, again, is this murder a religious issue, or is this murder a mental health issue? Or is it something else? Or is it both? Right? There's a lot of kind of layers to this, and it's important to pay attention to how we talk about it, because again, how we talk about it and how the media talks about it has a lot to do with how people understand this event and how it affects the minoritized community, how it affects the Muslim community, right? If the media goes ahead and says, yes, this person was murdered, the police suspect this guy is mentally ill, the end, then we understand it that way. If the media presents it as a religiously motivated crime, well then that reflects in a certain way on the Muslim community, right? And the assumption is that, oh, this is what Muslims are like, right? And again, that's not a valid assumption, but it is the connection that people sometimes make.
If the media assumes that it was a religious reason why he was murdered, then do they have any evidence for that, solid evidence that he was doing something inappropriate?
Well, what would be evidence of that? If this was a religiously motivated crime, what would be evidence of it? Right, so maybe we have something that he may have said prior to the crime. I guess we could look at his social media or his Facebook and see if he's making any posts to that, to that effect. But keep in mind that, it is important what the media says, right? Because we said the media is an important agent of socialization, right? They spread social messages, and they can very easily spread prejudices and stereotypes if they are not careful. Good morning. If they're not careful with their reporting, right? They can play into people's stereotypes and fears and prejudices that already exist. I think we could probably all, and I think we said this yesterday, we can probably all agree that the murder was wrong, right? If you live in a kind of pretty much any state, but a modern state like France, you're not allowed to kill people, right? For the most part. There's maybe a few exceptions, like self-defense. I don't know what France's laws are like, but you may not kill people, right? That's a law in most states, and so I think we can agree that this murder was wrong. But what about the comics themselves? Should they be shown or should they not be? Was the magazine that published them originally and the teacher in this case, were they in the wrong or in the right? What do you think? Are they, and this is the conflict, this is the rights conflict here. Free speech versus protection from religious discrimination. That's the balance, right? So is Charlie Hebdo and this teacher Samuel Paty, are they well within their rights to show these images? Or in showing these images, are they contributing to religious discrimination, maybe contributing to hate speech, maybe contributing to religious oppression? Is it one or the other? Or is it neither? Or is it both? What's going on? How do we understand this?
I don't think the religious rights they can still worship whether or not they're real. It's just that some of them may fall apart.
You think so? So it doesn't infringe on Muslims' right to believe and practice as they do,
Yeah, they can still do it.
right?
It's just that there's a comment about it.
But there's a what?
Comment about it.
Yeah, and this comic exists, but I guess in principle it doesn't keep them from practicing their right to freedom of belief and conscience and assembly, right? Muslims can still practice Islam, they can gather together, they can express their beliefs. The existence of the comics do not change that. That is true. But it is still disrespectful, right? I think we talked yesterday, is it hate speech? I kind of think it isn't. Muslims may disagree, or other people may disagree. I don't feel the comics are strong enough to be called hate speech, but maybe that's in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, it is disrespectful, right? So should we see this teacher as a hero? The French government seems to want to make him one. But is he a hero? Well, he definitely is. And again, that's the tricky part about this. That's the other tricky part about this particular instance, is that we have a murder. This man is a victim, and I would suggest that murder is not justified. Right? I would say that there is, in theory, there's nothing that I can do in this room that should result in me being murdered. Right? That's, as long as I don't do something completely horrible, I should not be murdered for anything I say or do in this room, right? I would hope. We'll see. But yeah, so this man was murdered, but that murder aside, how do we deal with an issue like this, where we have images or material or media that are offensive to one group, not offensive to another group? What do we do? Should we show them and simply say, yes, free speech, deal with it, or don't look at it? Or should we be more respectful to other people? If the tables were turned, like in what way?
Like
Like about white French people?
Yeah.
Okay.
They'll
Um,
be offended.
maybe, but what's the difference? What's the difference when you turn it around? Yeah, nice one. The power dynamic is not the same, right? And so, again, this is particularly hurtful or upsetting because Muslims are already a minoritized group in France, right? And maybe in all Western countries, there's a lot of prejudice against Muslims. There's, the word Islamophobia gets thrown around. I really don't like that word. I think it's ridiculous. But still, phobias are like natural fears, right? You're unreasonably afraid of spiders, but you don't have a phobia against Muslims. Like, that's ridiculous. It's prejudice. It's not a fear. Anyway, the term is ridiculous, but that's fine. So, so Muslims are already a minoritized group, right? And as we hear in the article, they're already somewhat segregated from French society, right? There's lots of Muslims living together in certain parts of the city, so they're kind of separated out a little bit, whether by preference or as a result of discrimination or as a result of economic inequality, right? They may be kind of forced into poorer neighborhoods. They're already a minoritized group. They're already vulnerable. They're already experiencing discrimination and prejudicial treatment already, right? Do we need to add to that with cartoons that offend these people? And again, I know I'm kind of leading in one direction here. You can probably sense how I feel about this, but yeah, do we need to offend these people for no reason? There might be instances where, again, we do find rights coming into conflict and we may have to work those out, but this is a cartoon, right? And cartoons are almost meaningless and not very important. Sorry.
But that's the thing, it's because it's so meaningless, there's no point. That's why it's so disrespectful, because they do it in the smaller space. They say, yeah, it doesn't matter, but then just remember this.
Yeah. Yeah, it shows, because the media itself is so kind of frivolous, right, and unimportant, it is pretty disrespectful in that way, right? Because it's so deeply offensive to Muslims, and yet for non-Muslims it's like, oh, haha, right? But it's nothing, right? Like, the cartoon is nothing, but yet so offensive to this minoritized group, right? So that might be a useful thing to think about, right? The idea that even though free speech gives you the right to say mostly whatever you want, as long as you're not spreading hate speech, it doesn't mean that you actually should say whatever you want, right? Your speech has consequences, right? What you choose to say, what you choose to display, either in your classroom or on social media, that has effects on people, right? And again, it's important for us to think about not only the dominant group, but the minoritized group and how those things will land for other people, right? And again, I'm sure, maybe the original magazine publisher, maybe they didn't think about that, right? Maybe they're like, oh, this is funny, ha ha ha, let's publish this. Or maybe they did think about it and they didn't care. Or maybe they thought about it and said, well, I guess we'll just see what happens. But either way, we need to think about what we put out there, right? What we communicate to the world. What about the teacher? Do you think the teacher did something wrong or did something right? That was the magazine, but what about him? Because we said the context was different, right? The magazine published the comics for haha, a little giggle, but Samuel Paty was actually trying to teach something about free speech. Did he do something wrong?
Did he know that it was actually to work those?
I think it's safe to say that he knew that. I think it's safe to say that everyone in France knew that these comics were offensive to the Muslim community. I think it's fair to say that he knew that.
And did he do anything to prevent people finding the comic offensive? Watch that?
Well, I don't think you can necessarily do that. Like, your question was, did he do anything to prevent people from finding it offensive?
No, I mean, like, did he prevent anyone who finds it offensive from watching the comic?
He did. So before showing them on the screen, he did let his class know that he was going to be showing them, and then if anyone didn't want to see them and would be offended, it was okay if they left the room.
What was the age group?
Kind of middle schoolers, so maybe like 15, 16, 17, 15, 16 years old, 14, 15, 16. A little younger than you guys, but still, I think, old enough to have this discussion. What's that? No? Old enough to have this discussion, I think. So yeah, did he make a mistake here?
I think he somewhat does. He somewhat did because if he know that it was offensive to some people, then why would he show it?
Yeah, if he knew it was offensive to some people, why did he show it? Well, I think he showed it for this very reason, right? To talk about almost the very same thing that we're talking about here, right? The idea that, you know, should we, even if we know these things are offensive to people, should they be shown, right? Should we show them and say, you know, if you don't like it, just don't look? Or should we take people's reactions into more consideration? Just because I can say something doesn't mean I should. I think that's probably the exact question he was asking his class. Because Charlie Hebdo is well within their fundamental freedoms to publish this comic, right? It's freedom of speech. They are allowed to poke fun at people's religions. They're allowed to do that, right? And I assume it was not, I assume it was light fun, but still, some people find that deeply offensive.
Is it like, is it offensive? Is the feeling strong enough for someone to like brutally murder the instructor?
Well, that's what makes it difficult, right? Is that we had such a strong, you know, this one individual had such a strong reaction that he went ahead and murdered the teacher. And so I would say that, again, nothing the teacher did in the class justifies that murder. However, that murder aside, the teacher still could have done something wrong here, right? So it's okay for us to say, you know what, I think the teacher made a mistake, while also saying it does not justify his murder, right? Teachers make mistakes all the time. So those two things are kind of separate. Although unfortunately, they were the end result of this situation. I think he was showing the comics to see, to engage in the conversation of what is free speech, right? What is allowed, what is not allowed, and you know, what do we do with these comics that technically they fall under the umbrella of free speech, right? People are allowed to circulate these comics and to have these views, but should they be circulated? Especially when we know the reaction that they're going to have, or we can guess. Should we?
I think if you're a nice person, you wouldn't offend people.
Not true.
Really?
Yeah. Nice people offend
And
other
if
people.
it comes down to like who you are as a person, what are you doing saying disrespectful things to individuals?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that this is not this is not a perfect example of that, but yeah, nice people can offend other people.
Yeah, but like, we're talking about like straight up disrespecting a religion. Of
Ru-
course, everybody makes mistakes, but come on, you know what you're doing here.
True. Does that mean, this might be a slightly different issue, does that mean that religion is beyond critique? So let's say I have real criticisms of Roman Catholicism, or what if I have real criticisms of Islam? Can I express those, even though I'm sure that Roman Catholics and Muslims would be offended by what I say? Can I say those things, or do I have to keep them to myself?
You can say them in a respectful manner.
Right.
It's non-humorous.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, and yeah, the context matters there too, right? The whether you're talking about humor or not, but it might actually be, might it be more offensive if I'm serious, right? Like if I go to Roman Catholics and say, you know, I think your religion is deeply flawed and it is based on really problematic ideas. Isn't that almost worse than just a little giggly joke?
Because I've had people question like Islam to me,
Mhm.
but straight up really like, I don't get it.
Mhm.
Like, oh, it's fine, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
If you disagree, you disagree. But you don't be like, oh, haha, you know.
True. There's a that's a meaningful difference. Absolutely. Absolutely it is. But again, where is the line drawn, right?
It's a very clear line.
Yeah?
Just don't be disrespectful.
What if you are unintentionally disrespectful?
No, but you're already talking about religion. Already it's a touchy subject.
Mhm.
So you're thinking about what you're saying. So you can't be disrespectful if you're thinking about what you're saying.
Hopefully not, but it's always possible, right? I'm always open to the fact that I may say something that offends someone else. Try not to, right? Especially in this class, right? We're dealing with a lot of potentially emotionally reactive material. I'm trying to sometimes make jokes about things to kind of keep the mood light, but it's very possible that I might say the wrong thing. It's very possible that I have said the wrong thing, right? And so I hear what you're saying, and I think you are mostly right, but I would encourage you to think about the fact that nice people can screw it up too. And, simply being a nice person doesn't mean that you can't make a mistake or say something disrespectful or offend someone by accident, because it happens all the time. But I agree with you 80%. 80% I think you're right. But be open to the possibility that nice people can screw it up too. So I guess that leads us to, did this nice person screw it up? I assume this teacher's a nice guy. Did he screw up?
You weren't there.
Did he make a mistake? We were not. Was this a mistake to show this in class? Even though I imagine he's a nice guy, I imagine his motives were pedagogical. I imagine he showed them for educational purposes, not to giggle at, right? I assume they were there to help create a discussion around these things, but did he screw up? I know it does. That's why I'm asking you, because it's a tough question. He what? True. He could have, but this is the other thing that hasn't come up in our discussion that maybe we'll just add in there now. One of the things that I think another teacher in the article mentioned is that, oh, or somebody mentioned in the article that, oh, like, yes, the Prophet Muhammad was in the cartoons, but, Jesus and Buddha, and they were in the comics as well, right? But is that the same? Why not?
Because Muhammad didn't have a picture to him. You're not even supposed to like imagine him face like wrong because you can't picture his beauty or something.
Yes.
So it's disrespectful to put an image to him.
Right. So the very idea that the Prophet Muhammad would have an image or a caricature associated with him, whether humorous or not, is offensive, right? And is wrong. You don't do that. In Christianity, yeah, we portray Jesus all the time, right? We know what he looks like, the white robes, the long hair, the beard, right? We know what he looks like. Buddha is depicted all the time, right? Sometimes as more of an Indian Buddha, sometimes kind of like a fat Asian happy guy, right? We've seen Buddha, we've seen Jesus. Depicting them in human physical form is not an offensive thing. It's done all the time. But Muhammad is different, right? So again, simply saying that, oh, well, Jesus and Buddha were in there, or Shiva or Vishnu, they were in there as well, doesn't count. It's not the same thing, right? Because you're allowed to show images of those religious figures or gods. You are not allowed to do so with Muhammad, right? So again, it's not the same thing. Okay. Do you want to say anything else about this? I'll tell you what I think. You don't have to agree with me. This is a complicated issue. There are lots of different views. You probably know what I'm going to say, but I'll say it anyway. I think he might have made a mistake here. I think he could have had the discussion without showing the cartoons. We have, right? We have had this conversation without seeing them. I think he could have done it without that. I think that showing the cartoons, knowing that it was going to offend Muslim students, was not a good choice. And I think that, again, showing them and having them leave the classroom excluded them from a discussion that they really were in the middle of, right? Like, that was a discussion about them. And in showing the images, he excluded them. He marginalized them, right? And again, I don't think he did it intentionally. I think he did it with really good intentions, right? I think he was trying to have a good conversation about an important subject, but I think he went about it the wrong way. And showing those things, again, excluded a group that should have been front and center to that discussion.
Yeah, especially in France, because they like a lot of things going on in the French and
Yeah, it's a very, it's a very topical, current issue, right? And yeah, like it's a good discussion to have. And so I think what he was trying to do is excellent. Like, he should have been having that conversation, but his Muslim students should have been in the room as well. And showing those images unnecessarily excluded them. And again, we did this. I said, if you want to see them, Google them, right? Everything is available on, everything is searchable on Google. Just Google it if you want to see it, right? I don't need to have it on the screen. And some of you did, some of you didn't, whatever, right? I can't control what you Google. But yeah, I think he made an error there. But teachers do that kind of thing all the time, right? It's especially with really difficult topics. It's hard to find the right line, right? It's hard to find the right things to say about this, and so I don't, I'm not criticizing him. I don't think that he meant to make a mistake. I don't think he meant to disrespect people. I don't think it's fair that he wound up dead. That's not reasonable in any way, and I feel bad for him and his family. But yeah, I think he could have done better. I think he could have done better. Unfortunately, he won't get a chance to because he's dead. Anything else we should say about this?
Has the government attempted to find a murder?
Mm-hmm. I think I could probably Google that on the break too. I think he's been found. He's been arrested. I think he'll stand trial.
Teenage boy or girl?
The murderer. Yeah, I think he's an 18-year-old guy, or was an 18-year-old guy at the time of the crime. But as you read in the article, there are a few younger kids who are being charged because they pointed out the fact that they showed these cartoons in class to the murderer. So they're being charged as accessories, which I don't agree with. Also, I don't agree with positioning this guy as a hero. I don't think, again, remember when we talked about binary opposites? Heroes and villains are binary opposites, right? You're either the good guy or the bad guy. That works really well in a lot of movies, especially Disney ones, but does it work in real life? No, right? Every hero's got problematic stuff, right? Lots of people think Steve Jobs or Elon Musk are like, wow, look at these guys. But there's a lot of crappy stuff about them too, right? Steve Jobs was apparently a nightmare to work with, right? In some ways, he was probably an awful person to be around. You would not want to be his friend, right? He's a difficult personality. But he also was able to do some pretty amazing things with his company, Apple, right? So nobody is purely hero or villain, and that binary opposite just makes it more difficult to understand things. And so, I know the government is trying to position him as a hero because they are pushing back against the Muslim community, but I don't think that that's beneficial either, right? Because it just pushes these people further to the edge, it isolates them more, and you're not going to have a good outcome by doing that, right? You need to somehow find a way to integrate these people into society. Not assimilate, but integrate, right? And again, basically waging a war, an ideological war against them, not going to work. It's not going to turn out very well. So I would say that making out to be a hero is a mistake. I think what he did was he made a little mistake there. I think his intentions were good. He's probably a good teacher, to be honest. I suspect he's probably a good one, but good ones make mistakes too. And unfortunately, this one cost him. Okay, want to take a little break? Okay, little break. Quick review of religious oppression, then classism. Then we'll start classism. What's that? Okay, so we're back, and we'll leave that issue. We'll leave that issue behind, and just maybe summarize really quickly by saying, of course, religious oppression has to do with inequality based on religious affiliation, right? So a dominant group will benefit from access to resources or legal protections or opportunities that people in other religious groups do not have, right? And so religious oppression, of course, can occur in societies even where freedom of religion is protected, right? And so we looked at a number of instances where that was called into question in Canada. We've talked about France and the idea of religious freedom there. To be honest, I don't know what sort of religious protections the Republic of France has built in, but I assume they are similar to Canada. Don't quote me on that. We said that we looked at Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we said that people have the constitutional right in Canada to basically believe what they want, right? You have freedom of religion and belief and conscience. You can assemble with other people who believe similar things. You can worship in the way you want to worship or celebrate in the way you want to celebrate. And you can create associations, you can create organizations to that effect, right? But we also said that people's beliefs are protected, but not necessarily their behaviors, right? And so that came up with the Trinity Western situation. The Trinity Western Christian group believes that, well, seems to believe from their community covenant that sex outside of marriage is wrong and that homosexuality is wrong. And the charter says that they are allowed to believe that, and they are allowed to speak about it, and they are allowed to practice that belief. And so Christians, if they don't want to have sex before marriage, they're allowed not to. If you don't want to engage in homosexuality, you don't have to do that either, right? People are free not to do those things. But the behavior is different, right? You may not discriminate against other people based on those beliefs. And of course, the Supreme Court ruled that that's what Trinity Western was doing. They were discriminating against people and they weren't allowed to. So again, there's a difference between having the ability to believe and practice what you want to believe and practice, but in the process, you may not deny others their rights, right? The right to an education, the right not to be discriminated against based on their marital status or based on their sexual orientation or identity. Yeah, and so in some cases, people's rights come into conflict, not just with religious oppression, but with other issues as well. And again, sometimes it can be a difficult process of figuring out where the limits of both of those rights are, right? Sometimes there's a bit of an overlap, and sometimes it's very contentious to the point where the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest authority in Canada, is the one who's asked to make the decision. And so, of course, in Trinity Western's case, did go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Law Society and of LGBTQ students, right? Saying that they may not be discriminated against based on the religious beliefs of the college. The college can hold whatever beliefs it wants, but it cannot discriminate. Yeah. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about classism. Should I ask you right off the top what classism is? What is it? Would you say? The oppression of people with no class, or the people who have class? No. Different positions in the hierarchy? Okay. How do we figure out where people are in the social hierarchy? What determines that? Where they work? Or what their job is?
Yes.
Okay, what their job is? Where they live? Money, how much money they have? Their car, sure.
possession.
Yeah, their house, their car, their amount of money, their occupation, their career. What else? Their clothes, sure. All that's connected to money, but that's a pretty visible outward expression of your status. You know, if you roll up in a Mercedes, right? One of those ones with the really big Mercedes logo on the front. Yeah. Maybe an Aston Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are pretty slick too. I actually prefer them to the Mercedes, but whatever. That's just my. Or a Jaguar. If anyone's looking to get me a birthday present, my birthday's coming up in August, so I'll take either an Aston Martin or a Jaguar. Kind of like, you know, I kind of like darker metallic gray, but I'm flexible. Flexible. Do you want to split it? If you want to go in halfsies.
No, I got it.
You got it? Thanks. Very generous. That's right. Thank you. I'll take you for a little spin in it as a thank you. Okay, so you are correct in some of the things that you are saying here, and so what we'll do is what we're kind of doing here is defining what class is, and you basically nailed it with your position in the social hierarchy, right? And so your position in the social hierarchy has to do with a few things, at least in modern societies it does. In the past, it might have had to do with the family you came from. In some countries like India, it might have had to do with the caste that you were born into. But there's a lot of different elements to social class, especially in modern societies. So I invite you to look at these three people, not the guy in the circle, not the guy in the bubble. He's got no class. But I invite you to look at these three guys. Now, these three men all have relatively high levels of power, right? And so class in part is about power. And I think I have a slide on this, but how would you define power to me if I asked you? What is power in a social context, not like horsepower of that Aston Martin that you're going to buy?
Power is like the ability to take control of something, especially like if it's something big or important.
The ability to take control of something, particularly if it's something big or important. That's not a bad definition. Did anyone want to add to that? The ability to influence people, that's good too. Anything else you want to add? It's actually good. You guys are kind of nailing this. A sociologist might tell you that power is the ability to do the things that you want to do or make the things happen that you want to happen when others at the same time want something else, right? So that's basically what you've said to me in Scotty and Nasra's definition, right? So here in this room, tomorrow we are having a quiz, right? Does it matter if you want it or not? Nope, still happening, right? So I have power, right? I have the ability to set a quiz and to give it, and it doesn't really matter whether you like it or not, right? You might not want a quiz tomorrow, but it is happening one way or the other, right? And so I'm not trying to tease you or whatever, but I'm saying that's what power is, right? You may not want one, but it's happening anyway, right? Because I have that amount of power. These guys here have power as well, but they have different kinds of power, right? So the guy on the far left, who's that? Yeah, that's Bill Gates. Who's Bill Gates? Yeah, founder of Microsoft, right? He's got more money than God, that guy. So he's got financial power, billions of dollars, more than he can ever spend, right? And so, yeah, people listen to him, and he is able to do things that average people cannot because he has so much money, right? Money is power, right? Money can be used to influence people. Money can be used to pay people to do things that you don't want to do or take care of things that you can't be bothered to take care of. all of those things, right? So Bill has a lot of power, and it's mostly financial, right? It's because he has a ridiculous amount of money. Who's the guy in the middle? Huh? Couldn't tell me? No? Guy in the middle is the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama is the head of the sort of Tibetan Buddhist religion. Okay? So he's been the Dalai Lama for decades. And he has social power, right? Is he rich? Actually, he has a lot of money. People give him a lot of money, but he lives in a very simple fashion, right? It's not really, he doesn't have power because he has money. He has power because he is basically the leader of a faith. And he's very respected even outside of that faith. So when he says things, people listen to him. And not just Buddhists, right? World leaders, celebrities who are into the sort of whole Eastern mystic yoga Buddhism thing. Lots of people pay attention to what he says. And again, it's not because he has money, it's because he has social power, right? He's the leader of this religion. He's widely respected as a person with wisdom, a man of peace, and people listen to what he has to say, at the very least, right? Guy on the right, I hope you know who he is. Justin Trudeau, right? Who's stole my beard, by the way. I had it first, Justin. Anyway, yeah, Justin Trudeau has political power, right? He's, as you know, he's the Prime Minister of Canada. The Prime Minister of Canada has a pretty significant amount of power within the country. And in fact, it's probably fair to say that Trudeau has more power in Canada than Joe Biden has in the United States. Yeah. So the position of US president is a powerful one, especially when you take into account global issues, right? Because the US is a heavy hitter on the global stage, if you will. But the president's power is much more constrained than is Justin Trudeau's. So Justin Trudeau doesn't have as much power as Biden on the global stage, but within Canada, the position of Prime Minister is a pretty powerful one. He has the ability to do things that Biden cannot.
How long can you stay Prime Minister?
As far as I remember, there are no term limits, but that's because becoming Prime Minister in Canada is different than in the US. So in the US, we saw a presidential election in the fall. Everybody went to the polls and they voted for Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kanye West, if you're into that sort of thing. But we're just going to pretend he doesn't exist. So you voted for one or the other, right? You voted for one or the other. Here in Canada, it doesn't work that way. We don't vote for the Prime Minister at all. So the entire country is divided up into sections, into political ridings, and every one of those has a representative. And so here, if we were having a Canadian election, a federal election, we're in, this is called Vancouver Mount Pleasant, I think. Or is it Vancouver East? I think it's Vancouver East federally. And so in this riding, in this geographical area that we're in, a Liberal candidate would run, an NDP candidate, a Conservative candidate, a Green Party candidate. They would all run, we would vote them, and somebody would be successful, right? As it turns out, is it Jenny Kwan? I think it's Jenny Kwan, and Jenny Kwan is an NDP, I think. Ooh, don't quote me on that. And so we elect her, we send her to Ottawa, she sits in legislature and she votes for us, okay? So all the ridings in Canada do that, and the party with the most ridings is the one who forms the government, okay? So if you look at all of Canada, it's the Liberal Party who has the most representatives, the most ridings. They form the government in Canada. The Prime Minister is whoever the leader of that party is. So Justin Trudeau is only the Prime Minister because the Liberal Party has the most seats, the most representatives, and he's the leader of the Liberal Party in Canada. Okay? Which means, A, that we don't vote directly for the Prime Minister. So the only people who voted for Justin Trudeau are the people who are in the riding that he represents, which is, what is it called? It's in Montreal. It's called Papineau, I think, is the geographical area of Montreal that Justin represents. So he has to win. He has to win there in order to be a prime minister. But he won there. He's the leader of the Liberal Party. He becomes prime minister. If the Liberal Party feels that, yikes, this guy is a disaster, we don't want him as the leader, they can actually vote him out and make someone else the leader of the party. And then that person would be prime minister.
So he's liked. Yeah, because he's bidding with people like.
So he's what?
Liked. Like likable by those people.
Yeah. He has the support of, yeah, this is the thing about Canada, is that he can be removed in a couple ways, all right? So if Justin Trudeau loses his marbles totally, the Liberal Party can hold a conference, remove him as the leader of the party, and put someone else in as leader. That would make him not the prime minister anymore, and whoever that new leader is becomes the prime minister. The other thing that can happen is if the legislature, so all of the representatives that we vote in, if they feel that he's a disaster, they can actually stand up and say, this is a vote of non-confidence. We do not have confidence in this government, and we want to vote on it. If it passes, basically the entire government collapses, and it triggers an election. So basically, the Liberal Party here can remove him at any time if they feel he's doing a bad job, and the legislature has the ability to kind of hit the self-destruct button. So if they have a vote of non-confidence, that triggers an election, and we go to the polls again. So and they can do that at any time. The problem is that if you do it, you have to make sure the people of Canada actually agree with you. Because if they don't, and we have to go to an election, have an election again for really no reason, your party's not going to get elected, right? If the NDP passes a vote of non-confidence, and everyone in Canada is like, oh, we just elected, like we just did this. Why are the NDP, triggering an election? People aren't going to vote for the NDP. So you've got to be careful, right? You can't hit the self-destruct button for no reason. Otherwise, people will get upset. Nobody really likes an election anyway. So the less often you trigger one, the better it is. So the office of Prime Minister is a little different from the President of the United States, but Justin has a little more power in Canada than Biden does in the US. But yeah, he has political power, Justin Trudeau. He also has a little bit of social power in that his dad was Prime Minister in the 70s and reasonably well respected, and his family has some money. So he has a little bit of financial power and a little bit of social power too. And I suspect he would not have become Prime Minister without being the son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. However, most of his power comes from his position right now, right? So, yeah, there's different types of power, and people can use this power to gain access to resources and opportunities that people with less power do not have, right? And again, that can be less financial power, that can be less social power, that can be less political power, or all three of them at the same time, right? So this type of oppression works the same way as lots of the other oppressions we've talked about. There is a dominant group, there is a minoritized group, and the dominant group usually tries to control social institutions. They can enforce their ideas and prejudices and social messages on society, and they will benefit from that, right? People in the dominant group will benefit from it. People in the minoritized group will suffer from it, right? Classism is held in place by a number of ideologies or beliefs, right? And so people are often ranked by economic status or breeding or occupation or level of education, right? So again, we tend to look up to people with a lot of money, or society does, even if we individually do not. Society seems to give respect and kind of look up to people that have a lot of money, right? And Elon Musk is a perfect example, right? He's very, very wealthy. His companies are very successful. People look up to him for that reason, right? Not so much about, it's not really about who he is as a person, it's about his financial success, right? Sometimes people have status based on their breeding. So they might come from a particular family. Here in the West, we don't quite have that so much. Trudeau might kind of be like that because comes from this family that, he's the son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, so the family thing gives him a bit more status. In the States, the Kennedys, if you've ever heard of them, the Kennedys are kind of like American royalty, if you will. They have a name and people give them respect and status because of that. Sometimes it has to do with your occupation, right? Some careers, some occupations are more respected than others, right? Garbage man, not a lot of status, right? NHL player, higher, right? So we give different amounts of status and prestige to different occupations. And levels of education, right? People who have higher levels of education, doctorates and things like that, tend to get a little more status and prestige than people with less, right? Ideas around classism are held in place by the idea that people in the upper class are somehow better, right? People with more money, more success, more education, more social or political power, that somehow they are better than the rest of us, right? And there are lots of social messages that support that idea. Is it true? Of course not, right? But again, we know that a lot of stereotypes and social messages surrounding all types of oppression are in fact not true, right? It is not true that there are real biological human races. It is not true that one race is better than the other, right? It is not true that men are more logical and rational and women are emotional and, flighty, right? Those things are not true, but yet the messages still circulate. Again, the dominant group gets to define what is normal, right? What is cool? What is kind of the default? And so, do I have a picture of that? No, hang on. Sorry, I thought there was going to be another slide after that. Some of the ideologies that support how we look at different social classes are meritocracy and individualism. Okay, and we've talked about both of these before. Meritocracy is the idea that success is achieved based on your personal talent and your hard work, right? That's the only way that people get successful. Successful people are successful because they've worked really hard, right? Unsuccessful people haven't worked hard, or they don't have any talent, or they just need to work harder. Right? And again, there is an element of truth to that, but it is not entirely true. There are other things that have to do with, there are other variables that have to do with people's success. I'll talk about that in a minute. Individualism is another ideology that supports classism. So the idea that people are free to make any choice that they want, right? People can do whatever they want to do. And again, that's not entirely the case either, right? At the very general level, we are all constrained by societal norms, societal expectations, by our gender, by our sexuality, by our race. All of these things play into our ability to make certain choices or do certain things, right? We like to think that we have total freedom to do whatever we want, but that's not entirely true, right? And some choices have pretty significant consequences depending on what the choice is and where you live. Here's some evidence of these types of individualistic and meritocratic ideologies. Yeah, we live in a classless society where anyone can make it, right? That's a big part of the American dream, right? The idea that anyone can be anything, right? anyone can be president of the United States. Well, as long as you're an American citizen. But after that, anyone can be president of the United States. Is that true? Why not? Why is that not true?
Because like you need to have this skill set in order for that.
Right? So in theory, although Donald Trump kind of disproved that, but in theory, you need a certain skill set in order to be president. Where would you get that skill set? Experience. How would you get that experience? Yeah, usually that's the case, right? If you don't have a solid college education, you probably can't be president, right? Most of the people who wind up being president most of the people in government have law degrees, for the most part. That's what the government usually winds up doing, is writing and passing laws. So most government people have a law background, right? What does it take to go to law school? Cash, right? Also, it really helps you if you have a good education prior to that, right? When you're elementary and junior high and high school years. If you live in a poor neighborhood, and you go to a poor school, you get a poor education, do you have the grades or the money to go to law school? No. Are you going to be president? Unlikely, right? What else do you need to become president? What's that? The what? Oh, yeah. So women have been kind of constrained in their ability to run for the presidency, right? We've had one woman run for the presidency in, how old is the United States? 250 years? One woman, and she wasn't elected. She didn't succeed, right? I suspect eventually we will have a female president of the United States, unless things get worse for the United States. I expect eventually it will happen, but yeah, your gender makes a difference, right? You can come from a good neighborhood and go to a good school and get a good law degree and work really hard, but as a woman, it's going to be much more difficult for you to become president, right? What else do you need to become president? Huh?
As the leadership mentioned.
Sure, you need some leadership skills. Where do you get leadership skills? Yeah, well, I guess you need some experience being a leader, I guess, right? Who's most likely to be selected as a leader? Huh? Extroverts, right? So it might be your personality. Extroverts are more likely to be leaders. What else? What? Old people, and specifically older men. Yeah, we often much more easily see men in positions of power than women, right? We much more often see men as leaders rather than women. I'm not saying that's right or valid, but we often do, right? So you're much more likely to have leadership experience if you're a man, because you're much more likely to be given a leadership role because of that. What about your kind of political family connections? Does that help you run for the presidency? Absolutely. Do you know how much it costs to run a presidential campaign? A lot, right? If you look at how much money Joe Biden spent getting elected, millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? TV ads, newspaper ads, YouTube ads, a bus or a plane that takes him around, well, maybe not so much during the pandemic, but a bus or a plane that takes him around the country so he can speak to the people, right? An office full of staff who are answering emails and sending out tweets and arranging his schedule and his hotel rooms and all of these things, and buying him those fancy blue suits that he wears. All of that costs money, millions and millions of dollars. You cannot run for president of the United States unless you have millions and millions of dollars. Do poor people have that? No. Is anyone going to give poor people that money? No. Do they have the connections? No, they don't, right? So again, anyone can be the president of the US, but that's not entirely true, right? It's much more helpful if you are a man. It's much more helpful if you're an older man when you run. You will need a good education, you will need a law degree, and you will need connections with people who are wealthy. And your odds of all of those things increase if you actually come from a wealthy family to begin with, right? And so, again, anyone can make it? Not so much, right? The other part of this, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say for today, the other part of this is the idea of the rags to riches story, right? The idea that, somebody can start off poor, rough neighborhood, maybe, raised by a single mom, and they can get themselves through school and achieve and become powerful and wealthy and successful. Great story, very inspiring, the subject of many movies, right? But is it true? Difficult. Is it true? Can you do that? Can you work your way up the ladder of society?
I don't know about this, but I think it will be impossible unless there's like in these stories.
Well, it's not impossible unless there's a miracle, but it depends on what country you're talking about. And what we're talking about here is something called, let me know if you've heard of this before, but something called social mobility, right? So is your society socially mobile, right? So if you are born into a very poor family, doesn't have a lot of resources, what is your ability to climb the social and economic ladder? Is it very possible, or somewhat possible, or totally impossible without a miracle, right? And the idea of the American dream is that it's totally possible, right? The American dream is that anybody can make it, right? Through your own hard work, and this is the meritocratic and individualistic idea, anyone can make it. If you work hard, you can do it, right? That's the American dream. But if you look at the American statistics, you will see that actually America is not a very socially mobile country. If you are born into a poor family or into poverty, the odds are reasonably good that you're going to stay there, right? If you're born into a rich family, the odds are reasonably good that you're going to stay rich, right? People don't move quite so easily as the American dream would have you believe. It's not like that in all countries. Countries like Sweden and Norway have much higher social mobility. So if you are born into a poor family, maybe you're a recent immigrant to the country and you're kind of starting off at the bottom of society, economically speaking, the odds are actually much better, right? So if you move to Finland, with your kids from, I don't know, Syria or somewhere, it may be tough going for you as a Syrian refugee and learning English, and, it may be difficult for you to find a job, but there's actually a much better chance that your kids will get a good education and get better jobs, right? And their kids' might do even better. So countries like that have much higher social mobility. There's a better chance that that's going to happen. Countries like the US, even though the social messaging and myth of America is that anyone can do it, the statistics say that it's not really the case, right? It's actually much harder to move up in American society than you might think. It's not very socially mobile. If you go back several decades, a number of decades, to India's caste system, that's a system with no social mobility. You are born into a certain caste, a certain level of society, that's where you stay. There's no ability to move up. You don't marry into another caste because the castes don't intermarry. That's where you are. There is no social mobility at all, right? So again, not without a miracle, maybe, but it depends on the society that you're in. Some societies are much more socially mobile than others.
What about, sorry,
Yeah.
what about Canada?
Canada has better social mobility than the US, as far as I'm aware. It does not have as good social mobility as the Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway. Sweden and Norway have much better social programs, social supports, free university, and so people at the bottom part of society, people with not a lot of money, have a lot more support from the government that allows them to kind of move their way up the ladder. People in the US don't have any, right? Because they're very individualistic, they're very meritocratic. Here in Canada, we're kind of about halfway in the middle. We do have some, oh, hello. we do have some supports for people, not as good as Sweden or Norway or Finland, but much better than the United States. So we're halfway. Yeah, so again, these ideas that circulate through society keep classism in place, right? They keep people with financial, social, political power. It keeps them in the position they're in when you have low social mobility, right? Because you don't have poor people or low status people rising the ladder. They stay where they are, you stay where you are at the top, right? And so these ideas that hold classism in place really benefit the people at the top because they don't have to worry about falling down the ladder, right? They're going to stay right where they are unless they, totally blow all their money and, make huge errors. But if they don't, they're fine. But the people at the bottom can work really hard, still not really go anywhere. Okay, that's all the time we have. We'll come back to that on Monday. Tomorrow's the quiz. Friday's your day off. Yeah, that's it. I will see you all tomorrow.